Hey, welcome to the Hell Has an Exit podcast. I'm your host, Bryan. This show is not affiliated with any specific 12-step program. If you or a loved one is struggling with an addiction, please find a local 12-step meeting. If you believe you may need detox or drug treatment of any kind, please call 888-699-9395 to speak to a specialist. The show is sponsored by United Recovery Project, a state-of-the-art drug and alcohol rehab facility. You can visit our website at unitedrecoveryproject.com. All right, welcome to Hell Has an Exit. I'm your host, Bryan Alzate. On this show, we interview guests who have been through any type of circumstance that's difficult. We do a lot of recovering addicts. Today on the show, we have close childhood friend Danny Prada. I've known Danny since I was a kid, and we grew up together. You grew up like 3 streets over from me. We have gone totally separate paths, like I always tell people, because like whenever you're a priest or pastor.
Are you calling me a priest, Bryan? Really? Really? I make fun of the people who call me that. I'm in LA Fitness and people are like, Father, I've been meaning to talk to you. I'm like, I'm not a father, dude. I'm not your priest.
You're a pastor? There's a big difference.
I was at the wharf a couple weeks ago. Somebody comes up to me while I'm, ordering a little drink. And this dude, he's definitely drunk. And he comes up to me. He
starts confessing?
No, he starts introducing me to all of his friends as his pastor. Yeah, as his priest. Excuse me. Yeah. Yes, as his priest. I'm like, dude.
Yeah, some people don't see the difference. That's how I feel when people say I'm sober.
Wow.
Because to me, I'm in recovery and I go to a different fellowship and you say clean.
Right.
And that might not seem like a big deal to you, but, to me, I'm like, nah, bro, it's clean. And I'm not... I'm sure you're not knocking someone who's a priest either.
I'm messing.
But yeah, there are terminologies that make a difference to people. Yeah, so you became a pastor and became involved in religion, and I became a drug addict, But growing up, did you see like my path diverting?
I don't think I did. When you started going down that route, I don't think I was very connected to you. I had more of a relationship with your brother, but you were always around.
Yeah.
So like we have those pictures of each other in one another's homes, and like when you were a little jit.
Yeah,
hilarious, bro. Before the corruption, I knew you.
Before the corruption. Did you like think that would happen to me?
Oh, no. I had no idea. And I didn't really realize the extent of it until much later on when we reconnected, realizing that you went off to freaking, what was this, boarding school?
Boarding school.
Yeah, and all of this.
Rehab, whatever.
Yeah.
So a funny story I always share. So when I was probably clean like 7-8 years, and like I was a fan of church, but I never went to church. Like my mom would invite me to go. We'd go like on a holiday maybe. But at that time, I was open-minded enough that if someone were to invite me, I would go. And I remember I knew that you were very popular at this other church. My mom would always say, I saw Danny singing at Flamingo Road or whatever. You asked me, like, you had this Bible study. And I thought it was cool. I wanted to support you. Real friends support real friends, So I was like, yeah, I'll go to this. And it was at your parents' house. And I sponsor a lot of people in the 12-step program. And I was like, hey, guys, if you want to go to Bible study, I'm going to go on Sunday. And my sponsees think I'm like on drugs. They're like, no, bro, we're not going to Bible study. This one kid was like, it's not for me. But some of them were like, cool. Like some of them were like really interested. Like, yeah, let's go. And I remember we went, and that's when you got introduced to Drew. And we would go. And not for nothing, but there was a lot of pretty girls there, because you and Emily are like really into the gym and fitness and all this stuff, and you guys don't look like, your average churchgoers.
Right.
And we start going, and I, not joking, like I remember there was a couple stories that you talked about that I had known the concept of them, but I think that something changes when someone's clean. A couple of years that the stories start to hit differently when you've opened your heart and your spirit up already. And there were some stories that had me crying, like in tears. Like I wouldn't show nobody I was crying, but there were some stories that had me really impacted at that Bible study. And then I went a couple times and I was like, all right, that's it. And then my sponsees would be like, bro, are we going to Bible study? I'm like, nah, I'm not going to go this week. And they'd be like, oh, you're a bad Christian. You don't want to support Danny. Oh, bro, Danny's the man. We got to go support him. And I was like, all right. So we made a habit of going.
Yep.
And we felt like outsiders, like, you know, here we are, like ex-drug addicts at like this church thing. I remember like, shout out Dom Chavon.
Yep.
He had broke up with his girlfriend and he was all sad and depressed. And
I love
was
this story.
I was like, bro, you got to hang out with the boys tonight. We're going to go out. He's like, no, I don't know. I'm like, bro, we're going to go to the strip club. We're going to go to Tootsie's. He's like, for real? I'm like, yeah, bro. So we pull up to your house. Like, it didn't hit him there. He thought we were meeting someone first or something.
Right.
And I remember we tricked him into going to Bible study.
Oh, man.
And he loved it. He still loves Heartway Church. I always tell that story. But that was my first introduction to somebody going to church and not really labeling themselves as a Christian, which I try to like tell people like, hey, man, like I can do things and not like label myself as it. You know what I mean? Like I can go visit other areas and not consider myself or label myself forever. And I remember I was what I would consider a regular churchgoer at Heartway. You started this church and I started going. And I remember like being really scared to tell you this. And I remember I told you like, you know, Danny, I love going to church, but like, I don't know if I'm like a Christian. And I thought you were going to get into this in-depth conversation. Right. And you just like looked at me and you're like, it's okay, bro. I love you. And you just like kept walking.
Right.
I think that's what's motivated me or like helped me get over this stigma of church.
Right. Of
it being like some type of belief where like, you're going to try to convince me of something where it's kind of like you always say this. And I never heard no one else say this, but you have to hold your ideas with an open palm and not a closed fist. And I feel like you truly do that. I understand. So I see a lot of similarities where me getting clean at a young age, people didn't take my recovery seriously or think it would last because I was young. I chose to take recovery seriously. You know, since I was 17, haven't had a sip of beer. Chose not to go to parties for a long time, chose not to go to the club scene, wanted to really get involved in recovery. And then I really got, you know, inspired to help other addicts and really made it my mission in life to help other addicts. Very similar to you, where I'm sure being young at 19 years old, being Christian is not the coolest thing to be. And I'm sure that you struggled with your own identity, who you are, meeting women, thinking you're a Jesus freak, you know, your own beliefs in coming from a hardcore Christian upbringing to what you would consider as progressive, right? I just want to hear like your side of like how your story has evolved.
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
because your parents grew up super Christian. So Backtrack, I remember going to your house, we couldn't watch BET.
Yeah, yes.
I remember.
Well, because, you know, BET after a certain time was playing a show called Uncut.
Yes.
You remember that?
Of course.
Yeah. I mean, how could we forget it? But, you know, my parents knew about that and they tried to protect my young, pure eyes.
Yeah, and we were not watching, like, I remember it was super, like, we used to laugh. Like, we was like, bro, Danny's house, like, he can't do anything, you know? You know, K-Rod would come over and, like, bro, you, like, you know, we were pretty wild. And we were just, and I remember you didn't have siblings. So, like, I remember you freaking out because, like, we sat on your bed.
Oh, dude, I used to really not like that. In fact, when I went to college, I had roommates for the first time in college, and I would leave every weekend because I already got hired at this big mega church in South Florida. So I would leave the dorm every weekend, and they would send me pictures of themselves inside of my bed and in the bed sheets because they knew it was going to tick me off. Yeah. I had a little OCD problem. But anyways, it's been interesting to hear you talk about kind of your experience at Heartway, because in the same way that you describe yourself as someone without rigid labels, we've kind of moved in that direction too. So when Heartway began and when you first started coming to Heartway, we were definitely more Christian than we are now.
Yeah, sometimes I tell people, like, I go to this church, but it's not really a church. Yeah, like, I wish we're just like people that come together. And sometimes, like, I feel like there's new people there welcoming me, and I'm like, whoa, bro, like, you just, like, you know, I've been coming here since it was like a Bible study thing. So like, and I know you personally. Right. To me, I don't see it as a religious thing that I used to, because I remember as a kid, bro, we would go to church as a kid, and sometimes my dad would go. And I remember we'd go and we'd hear this message about kindness and forgiveness and love, and they'd explain the Bible. And then in the car on the way home, it would all go out the window, like cursing. Oh, look at this guy, whatever. And I really saw a lot of contradictory going on. I really thought religion was silly, and you know, the only person I knew who was religious was my mom, who was borderline crazy, you know. And I say borderline crazy because my mom had a lot of faith where there was no evidence. My mom has always believed that things were going to work out with zero evidence, and we labeled that as crazy. You know, even with my story, you know. So up until Heartway, I really didn't really see church any other way, as opposed to I identify with the sinner. Like I go to, like I tell people, like, oh, I go to church because I identify with sinners, not Christians.
Right.
I go to church because I'm not perfect. I go to church because, like, I feel like I really lack in a lot of areas. And I used to be ashamed of that. I used to think like, oh, I can't go to church, Bryan. Like, I went to the club last night. You know what I mean? Where I feel like Heartway is a place where definitely does not encourage that, but encourages you to come as you are.
Because that's really what freedom is. It's accepting yourself as you are. And the reason why we get into these habitual patterns that can be toxic and unhelpful is because we aren't content with ourselves as we are. And so we look for that sort of validation, affirmation outside of ourselves. So a lot of folks think it's about changing their behavior, but that's the fruit. We got to get to the root. And the root is your identity, who you are. And so that's our work. And what we do at Heartway is we help remind people who they are and who you are beyond what you do or don't do, who you are beyond your successes and failures, who you are beyond what you think about yourself or what other people think about you. And as we move into this place of total self-acceptance, and we remove self-judgment from the equation, real transformation can begin to happen. So this is a message of love. It's a message of getting connected to your heart. Our message is one of self-discovery, getting to know yourself, because that's really the beginning of all wisdom, is knowing yourself. A lot of times we try and fix ourselves, but how can you fix or change what you don't understand? So that's the first step that I help people take, is understand yourself and do it without putting blame or guilt on yourself.
I'm reading this book called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari.
Love it.
In the book, he says, you know, the one thing that identifies us different from animals is that we have the ability to become self-aware of an issue and change. And that an animal can never say, hey, how did I act yesterday? Maybe I can change how I acted. Only a human has the ability to reflect at the end of the day and say, where could I have done better? And then wake up the next day and say, where am I going to do better? And start implementing change. And he said, change, the ability to change oneself is what differentiates us from animals.
That is huge. That is huge. And
cool,
yes, that's the power and the capacity that every single one of us has. But you have to be willing to face your stuff. You know, you have to be willing to own your stuff. You have to be willing to be honest and vulnerable, like you said, and not be ashamed of your weaknesses and the areas where you may not have gotten it right. And so we don't want to go there because we're stuck in cycles of guilt and shame. So we don't want to go anywhere near that. Plus, we blame most people. You know, we blame others or situations and circumstances outside of ourselves for us being the way that we are. We don't want to take responsibility. That's a very difficult process. It takes a lot of courage for somebody to go inward and seek to know themselves and understand themselves. But that is where all transformation begins. And so
one thing that's always been inspirational watching you is how much you read other books. How many books do you think you've read?
Well, see, I've read a lot of books, but that's part of my story, is that I was looking for intellectual answers for a very, very, very long time. And the only books that I would read, hundreds of books, the only books that I would read were around the topics of theology, philosophy, metaphysics, and spirituality. I've never read like a fiction book or a mystery book or a romance novel. All my books were just really dense, heavy, philosophical, big life questions about ultimate reality stuff. And the reason why was because my old parents...
Challenging Christianity or...
Well, a lot of those were Christian in origin. And then I began this process of rethinking my faith and really, they call it deconstruction. I deconstructed the inherited belief system that I received. And so Christianity definitely was put to the fire in that sense. I really had a lot of questions about some of the things I was taught. And
I believe people do this with life where, you grew up with nothing and then you start acquiring all these things and then you think that you need to have all these things to make up who you are.
Yes.
And then you go backwards to when you had nothing as a little kid and you were just as content.
Right.
You were just as whole
right.
back then than you are now.
Right.
If not, you actually are the more exclusive or the more rigid the idea, the more cut it gets, the more watered down it gets.
Absolutely. In fact, the way I see it now is the more rigid a belief is in my mind, the more delusional it is. I try to let it go almost immediately because I know I'm confusing and deceiving myself.
And even in the 12th, when we get to the 11th step in the book, it says the 11th step cannot be adequately explained in words. To begin to describe it would be a beginning to water it down.
Yes.
And there's something that goes, with spirituality and I might not come across as the most spiritual person, but I have a spiritual relationship.
Right.
Because I practice communication and prayer or whatever it is, But let's backtrack to your story.
Yes.
So growing up,
okay, right.
what was your belief growing up? What was your childhood like? Did you feel bullied? Did you feel out of place? Did you feel...
Well, I feel like I was always the kid that got along with everybody, but I did have an addiction and an obsession with being liked and getting other people's approval. Probably stemmed from my parents, who I felt I needed to gain approval from and earn approval from. And so that just kind of became the way that I related to everybody in my life. And so it made me a people pleaser. And so in one sense, I was very good at what I did. But on the other hand, it's a very empty way of living because you can have a lot of acquaintances, but you have very few friends, and you know everybody, but nobody really knows you because you're not really in touch with yourself. I couldn't be myself. I had to pretend to be who you wanted me to be so that you could like me.
That's my story. It's interesting because even though you grew up different than I did, in therapy, I've learned that two opposites are the same inverted. So I know that the kid who is a people pleaser and gets straight A's and follows all the rules is the same behavior as the kid who gets all F's and disobeys all the rules because they both are the same thing inverted. And a lot of times in the world, we'll look at someone who's the opposite of us.
Yep.
And we're like, look at this person, da-da-da-da. But the homeless guy who renounces all his possessions and says, screw the world, is the same as the businessman trying to acquire all the things and take over the world.
Powerful.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
Let's go.
So, that was me growing up, and religion was definitely a big part of my upbringing. There wasn't a choice in the matter. We're Christians and that's it, and even if you wanted to sleep over, you remember this, you would have to come to church with us on Sunday morning.
Oh my God, I forgot about that.
Yes.
Yeah, bro, I remember your parents were like, oh, if your friend wants to sleep over, he has to come to church with us.
Yes, bro. So that was the rule. If it was a Saturday night thing, Sunday we're going to church. And I grew up in a typical evangelical setting.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was just a fundamentalist version of Christianity that I also eventually ended up adopting in graduate school. Even when I was working towards my Master of Divinity, I went to the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary School. So this is really strict Jesus, literal Bible interpretation type deal. And so it's a very narrow little box. And I started getting bothered by the fact that everybody else was wrong except us, even amongst
Other Christians.
our fellow Christians,
Yeah.
right? It was like our brand of Christianity
is the most pure.
Right, it's the most pure, and we have to defend it and fight against the false doctrines and teachings that are being spread. I was in attack mode.
People do this in recovery.
Yes, we do this with everything. This is everything.
Everything,
This is everything. Okay.
So people who always say like, "Oh, religion is this or religion is that or recovery is like," I'm like, bro, everything.
Everything.
Your school.
Yes.
We have school competitions, school's the best.
It's
whatever.
called humanity. It's called ego.
Yeah.
And ego will use anything, right?
Let's back up. So wait, when did you become? Because people don't know how funny you are.
Okay, yes, right.
Bro, I remember.
Yeah, I was crazy.
I remember you in middle school. You were off the chain.
Yeah, no, I was crazy.
People have no idea.
No idea.
Oh my God. I used to flip kids' backpacks inside out.
Yeah.
We used to go on. Remember we turned the bus into a zoo one day?
Oh my
where
gosh.
everyone on the bus was making a different animal sound.
And we started that.
Yeah.
Man. Yes, I remember that. And I would do anything to make people laugh.
You were so funny, bro.
And that continued through high school.
Were you religious in high school?
No, I had just enough for religion to feel guilty about like looking at a girl's ass for too long. But that's about it, you know? Like I just had enough of it to feel guilty. And when I got to college is when I had a transformative experience as a result of meeting a group of guys from a fraternity. They came to do a step show at Nova Southeastern University where I went to school. And after they did their step show, they had won and they started talking about their faith and Jesus. And so that spoke to me because here were a bunch of young people my age who were really devoted to their faith. And I was making excuses and saying maybe later in life when I have kids, I'll be religious so my kids can grow up in a moral home like I did.
It's so interesting, bro, because that's the same thing that happened to me in recovery.
Yeah.
I went to a meeting and saw a bunch of young kids.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, wait, what?
That's what spoke to me. And so I started getting connected with them. Long story short, through that fraternity, I ended up in a cult. Like a
legit cult.
A legit cult where the dude was he was emotionally and sometimes physically abusive. I never experienced the physical part, definitely the emotional abuse to an extent, but this was a group of like maybe 15 people. We would meet in this dude's living room. He called himself a prophet, and it was all about like the end times. If you wanted to get into this group, you had to pass certain tests, read certain books. We were only allowed to read certain books that he selected for us. If he found out we were reading books outside of that curriculum, we were going to get disciplined and be in trouble. It was a very, like we had to submit to authority type of thing, and he was our authority. Like even life decisions, like if you're going to have a girlfriend or if you're going to move or do things like that, I had to kind of go through this dude. And yeah, so that was like a really fascinating time because of my curiosity. My curiosity is what has saved me in life. Always asking questions. Because I was always asking questions, I started to see the limitation of this group I was a part of. And by the way, these folks were like all about the end of the world. So the apocalypse is coming. Jesus is coming back. And you better be ready. And we are the chosen ones who
us 14 in this
we have the message, and we've got to go save other people. So it was like an extreme form of what a lot of Christianity is for a lot of people, but very extreme form.
So what drives people to be attracted to those things are the same things that drives people to be attracted to drugs. Because what drives me to like, why would a kid go out and look for people smoking crack? It's because they long for belonging. It's because they feel empty. It's because they want camaraderie. Because they might get a little bit of it at school, but it's not enough. And then they join something extreme, like a gang, or like a church, or whatever. And
sometimes you end up in places where
you don't belong.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because my whole journey has been about belonging, finding a place to belong. And it's like you said, I've had to go backwards. My spiritual transformation has been about going backwards, unlearning, going back. And now it's like, I feel like I've had to learn how to just be alone, and how to be satisfied and content alone. And it's been interesting to see how that's happened. But anyways, I had that little stint in the cult, and then I left there. and spent a couple more years in that fundamentalist religious framework. And then again, my deconstruction happened. I started questioning all my beliefs, started questioning, even the notion of God, heaven and hell, Christianity and Jesus being the only way that people get to heaven. And after I deconstructed my religion, I then had to deconstruct my sense of self. So, I started asking questions about what it even means to be human, to exist. Who am I? And that is another exploration that has taken me to wonderful, wonderful places. But it was difficult for me to lose my old construct of reality, because you got to recognize that religion, Christianity, was how I understood myself and the world. So when that began to crumble, that's why I would read so much, because I was looking for answers intellectually. And I finally, after I started reading about science, I expanded beyond religion. I started reading psychology. I started reading science. I started reading more philosophy. I started realizing that I cannot understand reality or capture reality with my mind. And that is what allowed me to kind of move beyond the need for certainty, move beyond the need to have answers, and to come back to this childlike, I don't know. And that has actually permeated every aspect of my life, in the sense that I want to approach everything as a beginner. I don't have all the answers. I'm always learning and growing and expanding. And I don't arrive at final conclusions, because life itself is not conclusive. That leaves me open, that leaves me humble, that leaves me more concerned with understanding other people than trying to convert them or prove to them that I'm right. It's made me a better listener. And so all of that has come from just kind of questioning my belief systems. And now we have this spiritual community where we invite people to do the same thing. And we invite people to question the mental paradigms and belief systems that are really blocking them from living into the fullness of their potential and the fullness of who they are.
So, and what is it like, following this faith, or trying to, and having to change friends, not go to the party, or like how was that transition?
That was really interesting, because I went so extreme. Like when I was 19 as a freshman in college, and I converted to Christianity for real, and I started getting really serious. You have this guilt thing that you can't do all those sinful things. So immediately, I broke up with the girlfriend that I had. This was my first girlfriend ever.
She thought you were crazy.
And she ended up thinking I was crazy. She's like, you're insane. You're a Jesus freak. She called me that. She's like, because I was trying to get her to come to church, and but then we'd go to church, and then after we'd hook up. And then I would, after willingly wanting to, I would put a guilt trip on her, because I felt horrible that we just did that.
Of course.
So it's it was just this religion thing. But anyways,
so you broke up with the girl.
At some point I had to break up with her, and it was just night and day. And then all my friends that I would go out clubbing with and hanging out with, it was just all of a sudden I cut off those relationships. And now that I look back, I'm like, man, that was really kind of abrupt and harsh. I can see why I thought it was necessary at the time. At that time too, I deleted all the music that I had downloaded from LimeWire. And
that hurts.
Everything that had cuss words in it, I didn't want to listen to it. I went to the Christian music store and bought a whole bunch of CDs. And it was just my way of I'm changing, and I have to do this. I have to eliminate everything that is not.
That's kind of what it takes sometimes.
Yeah, and that's fun. That was just the path I was on.
There was a time where I became very extreme about recovery.
Right.
There was a time where man, this is my life, and I don't want to be shooting heroin. I don't want to die. And dude, if you smoke weed, I'm not talking to you.
Right.
If you drink alcohol, I'm not going near you. I used to bring my book everywhere.
Right.
Because I needed it close to me. That's how secure I was to recovery. And I got away from that,
Right.
I learned how to have boundaries.
Yes.
But there was a time
in the beginning
where I needed to pivot.
Yes.
If you want to change your life, you kind of have to do something drastic.
Yes.
In the beginning.
Yes.
And I hope that you find your way to some type of balance.
Yes.
But I had to do extreme things.
Yes. And I did that too, more because I felt like there were certain moral and ethical standards that I had to now live up to. And so, it is what it is. I have a different approach now to things, but at that time, that's how it was. And
okay, so you basically cut off everybody.
Yeah, and now I'm like, Jesus, he was criticized by his religious contemporaries for being a friend of sinners.
Yo, yeah. I mean, I tell people. So honestly, like going to church and hearing the way that you talk about Jesus has made me been like, man, because I just feel like everyone else was like doing it totally wrong. It's like when you read the Bible, it's like, bro, this guy never judged anybody, and hung out with the worst of the worst, and was like, who are you? Because they need it the most. Well, why would a doctor go hang out with healthy people? You know what I mean? So he's trying to do whatever he can, and there's so many metaphors in the Bible that have just really blown me away. Sometimes when I see other people, I'm like, what book are you reading?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No. I know.
I thought I read something totally different.
Right. And that's why, like at Heartway, very recently, I just started saying this phrase, but I'm starting to describe Heartway as a place where you can find Jesus without Christianity. Because the religion that was started in Jesus's name is quite different than Jesus and what he was about and what he taught and what his life represented, which can be summarized in love. But oftentimes when religion gets in the picture, now you have the rules and the regulations.
Hierarchy.
Now you have the hierarchy. Now you have the beliefs and the dogmas. And now you have in-group and out-group on the basis of believing rightly or not. And when I started
outcast people,
right,
It's an exclusive thing, and
exactly.
And it's like this is the opposite of what he was trying to do.
Religion actually means to rebind, to bring together.
Oh, that's interesting,
right? But it's been used as a weapon to bring people apart. So there's nothing wrong with religion, like it's about how we use it. Same thing is with the Bible or with your 12-step book. It's about how you use it. Because you can use it to bring healing or you can use it to beat people over the head. And so how are we going to approach that? But I love like the fact that when I've listened to other spiritual teachers that I admire, like Eckhart Tolle, Adyashani, Muji, these are spiritual teachers that don't have religious affiliations. They talk about enlightenment and non-duality, and they're mystics. And these are my influences. And when I listen to them talk about Jesus, that has captivated me more than anything any Christian has ever said. And so I'm like,
it's somebody who could pick anything as an example.
Yes.
And like Eckhart Tolle, like I think I remember asking you about him a long time ago, and you're like, no, I never read it. I remember I was like, wow, really? Like it's so good. And then I remember thinking like, maybe, a Christian guy is not going to read this book, and like Don Miguel Ruiz, like the Four Agreements or something like that. I actually listened to Eckhart Tolle before I went to church. That's what started to pique my interest, because the way he was talking about it was not the way that like a Christian person would talk about it.
Right. And I have like years of experience in this like Jesus tradition. I've studied the Greek and the Hebrew and the historical context of the scriptures and all this wonderful stuff that has been a beautiful hobby for me in my life. And I'm so happy that I can use all of that to help people. Like I don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But for me, it's about gleaning the wisdom that's found in every path. Like why would I rob myself as a human being of the wisdom, ancient human wisdom that has been around for so long, just because it's under a Buddhist garb or a Hindu garb or a Muslim garb or a spiritual but not religious garb? No, I want truth. I want wisdom. I'm open to it wherever I will find it. And that is what makes this spirituality thing exciting, because ultimately we're all saying the same thing in just a different way.
And I see it as like food, like in Colombia, bro, they make their pork and chicken a little different than they make it in another place. But it's the same thing. It's pork and chicken and rice and bread.
Exactly.
Bread in America is different than the bread in India. But it is bread, and they do it a little differently. I would imagine that spirituality is like the food, and religion is like the country that it's made in.
Yes. Because again, it goes back to your point with step 11, like ultimate reality is beyond words, beyond concepts. We cannot capture the essence of what life, God, the universe is with words or concepts.
And then I always feel like people that are like super, super hardcore Christian living in America, it's like, this was all written in the Middle East.
Yes, exactly.
It's like, that they weren't speaking English,
yes,
right? Like,
exactly.
that this was like, what language was Jesus speaking?
Jesus spoke Aramaic.
Aramaic.
And the New Testament was written in Greek. So we don't even have Jesus. Yeah. We don't even, Jesus didn't even write anything down, by the way.
Yeah.
So the words we have are words that were written from his followers about him. And there's 4 different books in the Bible that talk about this man's life and his significance and meaning to these earliest followers of his. But if Jesus cared so much about the rigid beliefs and like the words and the concepts and the dogmas and the doctrines, he probably would have wrote some stuff down to tell us, hey, believe these 3 things. But all we have left is some really interesting stories about basically homeless dude who would go around and like talk to the people that society ostracized and give dignity and worth to the folks that were excluded in his day, and who spoke truth to ordinary people in ordinary ways, and who lived a life of radical trust in God.
So what I thought was really interesting, what I've never seen, is that you actually had a rabbi come talk at your church. So let's back up on how you sing it. Let's back up on where the idea to start a church and like how the Bible study went. And it's so interesting because we're almost the same age. And the time that you started Heartway is the same time I started a treatment center.
Yeah.
In our local town, So like, how did you wake up one day and say, I want to do my own Bible study? Because I'm sure being young, there's a lot of stigma.
Oh, yeah.
Because I remember I would go to church as a kid and my dad would be like, oh, did you see that priest? He was like 30 years old. Why would I ever listen to that guy? He's never even been married before. Because in Catholic, they don't get married, right?
Yeah, no,
so my
they
dad
don't.
used to say that growing up is like, how can a non-married guy tell me about marriage?
Right. Yeah, I've experienced that a lot because I've been doing this since I was 21. I was ordained as a pastor at 21 years old.
At 21, you were a pastor.
Yeah, and I'm 31 now, turning 32, I think, in August. Yeah, I think I'm turning 32. I don't remember. But yeah, like that's always been a thing, my youthfulness. But it's been interesting because for all of my young adult life, like this is what I've done. And so it's been dedicating my weekends completely and totally to church, while other friends of mine were doing fun things, I was in church. And I had to deal with a lot of anger that I had built up inside of me towards religion. And this is very recently, maybe even 2 years ago or so, when I really started to confront this anger that I had towards religion and my religious upbringing and the religious indoctrination that I was given, because I felt like it caused me to miss out on life. Like there was a bunch of stuff that I wanted to do that I didn't do because I wanted to be the good boy and do it the right way. And that was something that I had to face and process and work through.
Young adults feel this way when they have kids young. So when people have kids young, they start to resent their children because, you robbed me of my 20s.
Right. And, what I had to come to the realization of was that this entire path has led me to where I am now. And what I have now within myself is a treasure worth more than anything I could ever imagine to receive by living the kind of lifestyle I thought I was missing out on, going partying, drinking, sexing. You know what I mean? And so, but again, it's like when you grow up how I did, it's like repression. I would repress my sexual desire. I would repress a lot of these desires that I have, and that has an effect. That ends up having an effect. Those are the kind of things that I've had to work through and accept and integrate as a part of my life path.
When did you have the idea to start doing your own Bible study?
At 25 years old is when I just got married. And right after we got married, I said, let's start this group at my parents' house. And, at that time, I just started asking questions, but I was still very much in that old mindset, in that conventional religious mindset that I had. But we wanted to just make a safe space for people, and that's what we did. And little by little, that started growing, and we outgrew the house, and then we ended up moving into a facility. And now it's been 6 years of doing this, and the community has been with me through my own evolution. You know, even going post-religion now, which is very fascinating. And a lot of the people that started with us aren't necessarily with us now, but there is a lot of continuation. We do have a lot of new people, and some of the folks who have stayed on the journey like yourself. You know, it's been a beautiful ride. It's been a beautiful ride to see how we have become more loving, inclusive, expansive.
So what do you say to people that say like, oh, you don't look like a pastor?
Yeah, I mean,
like people say that to you?
Yeah, you know, people say a lot of things. You know, one person wrote us like, hey, is it a prerequisite to be good looking to come to this church? I'm like, dude, people would say all the time, because like I would invite just people from the gym, you know, like friends from the gym. And supposedly, I guess some people would feel insecure about that. I guess, I don't know what the deal is, but you know.
Because I remember you told an interesting story about, you know, how your wife, Emily, has gone through her own. I mean, I feel so bad. It's because like, all she did was marry this guy. She didn't ask for any of this. She was like, what do you mean? I just married this guy. Like, I'm just living my own life. And it's kind of like crazy how like, because, you know, and we do this with the president. You know, if you're the president's wife, you're a reflection of him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people expect, you know, the first lady to be a certain way or whatever. And I feel like Emily is really rebellious.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I tried to put her in a box because of that same false assumption that I had, which is you're an extension of me, you're a representation of me, which basically means I get to control you and you're not your own person, you know? And yeah, I had good intentions, but that was because I thought I needed to do that to be accepted in the religious world. And so my wife used to work out a lot. She still works. We still work out a lot.
Compete, right?
But she used to compete, exactly, bodybuilding shows, and they would have a bunch of bikini pictures and stuff. And I would tell her, look, you can't be posting stuff like this. There's actually one job before I started Heartway, 2015, the oldest church in Hollywood, Florida. It's like 90-something years old. The pastor was leaving, and he asked me to step in as the interim. It was an old Baptist church. And the interim means I stepped in for 3 months in between them searching for a new guy. And they were considering me for the position to be the new pastor. I was looking forward to it because I'm like, look, we get to inherit a building. It's very hard to find property out here. And they didn't choose me. And there was one deacon who was on the board who said, Danny, man, I really was hoping that they would choose you to be the next pastor, but they didn't. And, you know, part of the reason why is because they said that your wife just basically isn't like pastor's wife material. You know, like her dress is too scandalous, and with her hair being the way that it is, it's just not, you know, going to cut it for us. And I remember, like, I didn't necessarily mean to, but I kind of...
Did you throw that in her face?
I did throw that a little bit, you know, and she also felt that like, man, I'm ruining my husband's career path or whatever, you know, so that's where we came from. And we had to grow out of that and free ourselves from those shackles that come with life in religion and religious leadership.
How has your family taken in how different you have become with Christianity? Like, at some point, are they like, all right, Danny, what are you doing?
Well,
like, or are they supportive of it?
Yeah, I lucked out with my parents. I don't know about extended family or whatnot. I mean, the issue or topic hasn't come up about my own spiritual journey, but my parents have been supportive since day one. And with all of my change and evolution, they've continued to be supportive. And there was even one point I remember maybe early 2017 where I still wasn't very open and adamant about the fact that we were affirming of LGBTQ people, because I knew I had some Christians that were listening to our message that, you know, that's a no-go because the Bible says that's a sin. And so, you know, we can't encourage them to continue in their sin. But I had already kind of worked through some of those things myself, and I knew like...
And hey, I remember... you know what's so interesting is that I've seen you do things that I've never seen anybody do, where I've seen you preach a sermon. Is that what it's called? Preaching a sermon?
Yeah.
I've seen you preach on Sunday, asking a question to yourself. Like, you know, some people would say that we shouldn't allow LBGT people here. You know what I mean? Some people would say that these people aren't allowed here.
Right.
And you wouldn't say yes or no. You would kind of be like, I don't really know.
Right.
You know, like you were still like, I don't know what the right answer is.
Yes.
And that's like, I've never heard a pastor be like, yeah, I really don't know which way to go with that one.
Yeah. And I made a commitment a long time ago that I was going to follow truth wherever it would take me, and that I would be authentic and be completely and fully myself. And so part of that is letting people in on this wrestling match that I have, you know, that I have had with certain issues and topics. And I have never been afraid to tell people, I don't know, I don't have all the answers. Some people love that. Other people have left our community because they feel like, no, you're supposed to be the answer, man. And you're supposed to give us all the answers. But I was inviting people into the dialogue. You know, because that's really what it's about. And this is an ongoing dialogue. I mean, for us to think that we have finality when it comes to our answers, especially about God and life and humanity, it's like, dude, years ago, people were using the Bible to justify slavery. Mm-hmm. Years ago, people were using the Bible to justify war.
Murder, all sorts of things.
And people do that with the Quran, and people do that with everything.
And how they treat their wives.
Yes,
you know.
Exactly. So anyways, like my dad, I remember he listened to a podcast episode that I did with somebody, and I had said to them that, you know, there are some things that I want to say, but I haven't said yet because of certain people in the congregation that I don't know how they would be able to receive it or handle it. It may be a big shocker for them and their worldview. And I mentioned one of those people is my father, who comes from a very rigid, fundamentalist, religious background. And my dad heard that podcast. He called me and he said, son, I just want you to know that you need to say whatever God has put on your heart to say, regardless of how you think I'm going to receive it or not, whether I agree with it or not. And he says, I love you and I support you, and just say what you need to say.
Wow.
And who, you know, that's so rare. Mm-hmm. That's so rare to have that. And so I'm so grateful that my family has been incredible with me through this, because it's hard. I did lose a lot of friends even when I started questioning Christianity and rethinking my faith and my spiritual journey. Like, I had a lot of other local pastors from that world that I was a part of who now started trashing me and saying a lot of things about me and trying to warn people about me because I'm not preaching the truth anymore. And so, you know, going through all of that and with my people-pleasing background and wanting to be liked, that had an effect. But even though my parents have been so supportive, I had to kind of make the decision beforehand that even if they weren't, I'm going to follow this through. And I'm still going to love and respect them if they don't understand me. Mm-hmm. That's been an important part of my process.
What about, you know, I remember something else that really, like, I saw happen at Heartway that I've never seen is when you brought up this scenario where you were like, you know, I have people that are not Christian. And, you know, I think you're saying, like, I had a friend's dad tell me that, hey, my dad was Muslim and he was a hardcore Muslim and he just passed away. And are you here to tell me that he's not going to heaven?
Right.
And I remember, you know, you saying, like, you know, that my friend was saying, you know, this guy lived more like Jesus than anybody else I know.
Yep.
And, you know, what I think is interesting is that your ability to bring in other religions into the conversation, into the dialogue,
right,
with still being faithful to what you believe in.
Right.
And I don't think that religions compete with each other. They complement each other.
Right.
So just because I, you know, love one thing doesn't mean that if you love something else that it makes me question my own. Like, you can never take away what I believe.
Right.
But I'm interested to see how I can find a silver lining or a commonality. And the more that you appreciate what you believe in, the more I appreciate what I believe in.
Yes. And the way I like to put it is, even if we don't see eye to eye, we can still walk hand in hand. Mm-hmm. You get that imagery? We may not be able to see eye to eye, but we can still walk hand in hand. And that's why I emphasize love, because love is the pinnacle and the fulfillment of all religion, philosophy, mysticism, ethics, politics. You know, love is a force that is able to bind us together beyond our beliefs. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you love somebody, you love them not because of their beliefs, not because of anything other than just who and what they are, and because love is inside of you. And whether those beliefs are congruent with yours or not, that has nothing to do with the love you show and the love that you give and the love that you receive. So that's the focus.
Can you talk about like a specific time where you like really, really felt like someone did you dirty, or like you really resented, and like how you got over that? Because for me, that's like my biggest issue is that like, I don't know, sometimes I hold people at such a high standard that I just think like, I would never do that to you. I would never have done that to you. Like in a million years, I would never, like I just wouldn't do that. And then I just think about it all the time.
Right.
And I can write an essay on why they did it, and I can philosophize why they felt that this was okay, and I knew that it was nothing personal.
Right.
But that feeling cannot be intellectualized.
Right.
You know?
I have a hard time recalling any sort of particular resentment that I've had towards somebody or needed to work through, other than, like I said, like this resentment that I had to overcome towards my religious background. And, I realized too that when I was that kind of person, I didn't have necessarily bad intentions. I was just repeating and regurgitating what I was taught. And I actually thought I was trying to help other people when I was like a religious fanatic. And so when I was pointing the finger of blame towards those other religious people that taught me the things that they taught me and said mean things to me when I left their fold and all of that stuff, when I was blaming them, I wasn't taking into consideration that they too don't really know what they're doing. It's like Jesus's words on the cross to the very soldiers that hung him up there were, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." There's a sort of like unconsciousness that people operate in where they don't even really know what they're doing. And when I got to see my own innocence, when I looked back at my own religious, fanaticism, since I don't have a better word for it, when I saw my own innocence in that, I was able to start seeing that innocence in these other people that I was blaming and holding resentment towards. And that's what allowed me to say, I'm going to forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. And so I've just tried to live my life from a state of acceptance. Whatever it is, to resist it, to oppose it is just going to create suffering in me. And I'm the one that has to live with the anger. I'm the one that has to live with the bitterness. I'm the one that has to live with the resentment. If I have to live in this house, I want to keep it clean. You know what I'm saying? Nice and organized. And that bitterness, that resentment is only going to make me miserable. It's not going to even do anything for that other person. So to clean the house from that resentment by just accepting what it is, accepting the situation for what it is. And like you said, it's those expectations. We think that these people should act a certain way or that they owe us something, but they really don't.
Yeah, they say expectations are premeditated resentments.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you of, one recent experience. Obviously, you know this. All my crypto got stolen.
Yeah, that was crazy, bro. When you called me and told me, I was gassing you up so hard. You were like, yo, what crypto should I buy? I'm like, all of it. Yeah. You're like, how much should I put in there? I was like, bro, put every dollar you got. Crypto's going to the moon. I was like on this crazy crypto high.
Yes.
Oh my God. And then it got pirated.
And so I'm like, all right, let's do it. So I put some funds towards crypto on Coinbase, and I wake up and I'm, by the way, this was before like this crash. And so I'm seeing some gains. So I'm putting a lot in there, for me. And I wake up one Friday morning, your password has been changed. I had no access to my account. And then I finally was able to see in my trash folder because they got into my email and redirected all the emails from Coinbase to my trash bin. So I couldn't see it when I tried to reset the password. And I look, and in the bottom of the trash, it says that they sent all my Ethereum to another account, which, by the way, when I started following the wallet, because you can see on the blockchain, the wallet.
How much wallet's in there?
My crypto, which is not a lot, but it was a lot. Ended up in a wallet that had $172 million worth of ether.
Yeah.
So, this was a big fish, a big old whale swallowing a bunch of little fish.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, like that Friday, I called you Friday night to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
So that Friday morning, I couldn't help but just laugh. I was laughing because the feeling that came over me was, this is it? Like, this is what we get so scared of, Like, for me, the money that I put in was my little savings. I already dipped into my savings because COVID. Now I put the rest of this little savings in there, and this was my little cushion for, for a little bit, and it gets taken. So now, it's tough, and I don't have nothing. And all I could do was laugh because I said, this is what we're so afraid of. And I said, my mind couldn't create any meaning out of this situation. It's like my mind did not allow me to start projecting into the future this doom and gloom and victimhood. It's like it was not in me. And to be able to see that there was none of that in me was just so refreshing that I could only laugh.
Mm-hmm.
I could only laugh that I still was carrying peace inside of me. Long story short, that Friday night I call you, and then the Saturday morning, Bryan calls me and he says, hey, dude. Actually, I wake up from a text to Bryan. From Bryan, he says, bro, I want you to make a Coinbase. He's like, I'm going to send you your initial, basically as much as your initial deposit was, which was a substantial amount. And I love you and thank you.
No problem.
And, I had a friend of mine who was like, bro, this is your karma. He's like, you help so many people. You're always doing like serving other people. And now the universe is paying you back. And I don't think like that. For me, it was like, this was a gift to be able to get that money restored because Coinbase still hasn't got back to me.
Yeah, they're the worst.
That's,
Coinbase, if you're listening,
yes,
bro, give
come
Danny
on.
Prada's crypto back,
Yes,
bro. It
please.
was stolen from him. Come on.
So, but this gift that I got from you was the icing on the cake. But the cake for me was immovable in peace.
Yeah.
Whether I've got the money or I don't have the money. And that's how I want to live my life. It's with this indifference, whether it's good or bad, whether it's up or down, positive or negative. I want to find that nice middle ground.
I always try to think about worst case scenario if all this doesn't work out. And one of my employees told me this. I was stressing one day and he was like, are you okay, bro? I'm like, bro, I'm just stressing. He goes, what's worst case scenario? I was like, I lose everything. I don't know. He goes, your parents still got a house? I'm like, yeah. He's like, so worst case scenario, live back home with your parents. It's not too bad. And I remember I was like, he's like, you'll be fine. He's like, you're young, bro. You move back in with mom and dad. You'll be fine. And I remember being like, thanks, Jeff, Wow. And ever since then, I try to think like, what is the worst case scenario? And it doesn't really seem too bad when you really think about it. Like, our mind will tell us that it's unsurvivable. And then when you survive it, it's kind of like, that's all you got.
And see, the thing about it too, it's like, it's so easy to be treated like this, like I was, for example, like just have somebody randomly that I don't know, who doesn't know me, just take everything. It's so easy when you are on the other side of that kind of selfishness to now become it and to repeat it.
Yeah.
Like it's very easy to start going down that train of thinking. Well, if this is what people are doing, if this is how it is out here, if he stole from me, then maybe I need to steal from somebody else. If we're not careful when we're fighting monsters, we end up becoming the very monsters that we're fighting.
That's how trauma cycles begin.
That's how it goes.
So I always thought like, if you're a cop in Boca, you ain't really a cop. You know what I mean? Like if you're a cop and if you've only patrolled Boca Raton, if you've only, patrolled Coral Springs, like, you could be on the force 10 years. You ain't never seen anything, okay? But if you're a cop in Hialeah, Overtown, for 1 week, you got enough experience to last, 5 years of Coral Springs patrolling. And I share that because one thing that I saw you do is that you went to work at a legit homeless shelter.
Yeah.
Like, I'm talking, because I know the Broward Outreach Center. And it is where people go that have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
What was your experience like working there? How did you even, I remember when you told me, because I'm in recovery. I know these places.
Right.
So when you were like, yeah, bro, I'm working at the Broward Outreach Center, I was like, the Broward Outreach Center? Because I've spoken there. I've been there a couple times. I've picked people up from there.
Yeah.
When I look at you, clean cut.
Yeah.
You don't like to get dirty.
Yeah.
Super. I was like, bro, I don't know if you know what that place is.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was...
How long did you work there for?
5 years.
Wow.
And it was as we were starting Heartway, I was able to have the opportunity to become the chaplain there at the Broward Outreach Center, Miami Rescue Mission. And I did it for 5 years. I remember there being times when I would pull up and park at 7 in the morning. I would open my door, and right before I step, there is human feces there because the homeless folks who couldn't get into the shelter
slept there.
Ended up sleeping there at night, and then they left a little deuce. And then went about their way in the morning, and like that kind of stuff. And then you have people who they're coming in and they're in our transitioning building, just coming off the street, and they have bed bugs, and they have all these things. So it was definitely a fascinating experience. But I loved my time there because I got to see people in worst case scenarios. And I also got to see people in worst case scenarios who were still smiling. What a gift that was. I remember one dude who was there had his guitar and he would just play and sing, and it was like no problem. Now, I don't want to glamorize this because that's not how it was for most of the people that were there, but I did get to see little pockets of joy in the midst of some really steep suffering. And
we're talking 20 years, 30 years of homeless shelters, on the street, jail.
Yeah.
So sometimes, I could imagine now you get hit with some pretty high class problems. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like people are like, oh, my life's over. Someone took my crypto.
It's different.
And when you're at that homeless shelter, you know, you're meeting folks that are, when you talk about the end of the road. This is the end of the road for most people.
Yeah, one girl, she was a prostitute in Miami, and she was 19 years old, and she came to my office, and she had a lot of just questions, a lot of shame that she was trying to work through, and abuse that she was dealing with. And, I realized during those years that sometimes there's just nothing to say, and all there is to do is listen and love and affirm and show empathy. And that's what I became good at during these years. But this girl, after we had that conversation, she thanked me. It was a beautiful conversation. We did a little prayer afterwards, just like so she can leave feeling uplifted. Next day, they found her upstairs. My office is on the first floor. She was on the third floor. She hung herself in her room up there because it was just too much for her. People coming straight out of jail into my office, people who have murdered other people who have, just one guy who he was hallucinating, and he was just like, there's people that are chasing me and they're coming after me.
Because at the homeless shelter level, there's I would say 50% mental illness.
Yeah.
I would say 50% mental illness. And I would also say that homeless shelters do not have any resources for these people that should be in a high level care facility, because there are they don't have insurance. They got nowhere to go.
Right.
And a lot of these people really need some type of high quality care.
Yeah.
That, over there, they're probably not getting.
Yeah.
They're really getting a place out of the rain for a little bit.
Yeah. They get at that organization, it was the best we could do was offer them a case manager. And we did have a team of therapists that would work with them, and we would have outside groups come and do AA and church services, and then I, as the chaplain, was doing a lot of one-on-ones with folks. But it was limited.
Did you have experience with mental illness at that point?
I didn't. And this was,
You just got a crash course?
Crash course. I mean, I was in my office the first week that I got there, and I was setting up my desk, and the lead therapist comes into the office, and she sees that on my desk I had a cup with a couple pens and a pair of scissors, and she says, Danny, no. She's like, you got to put those scissors inside of your drawer in the desk. And I'm like, why? She's like, well, you just don't know if somebody's going to have a moment and they grab that and they can use it as a weapon. And then she says, you also want to make sure that you don't block yourself off from the door. You see how right now the way you are, you're blocked off from the exit. You want to make sure that you have this set up so that you can make a straight shot to the door. I'm like, where am I? What did I sign up for? There was one time when I was leading a class because I basically was in charge of their entire like educational process, going through like this journey, teaching different principles that we had. And I would teach these courses to them every day. And when I first got there, there was one dude who, in the middle of me talking, he would just bust out laughing. And I'm like, I started getting mad. I'm like, what is going on here? I'm like, what's so funny? At one point, I called the dude out. I'm like, what's so funny? Is there something that you want to say? And he just like cowered. And he said, no, nothing. 5 minutes later, he started laughing. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't know that was something deeper there, but I took it personal at that time. So I learned, as you go. But it was a fascinating experience working with these folks, and it opened up my eyes so much, and it was one of the best times of my life.
What's like one of your favorite success stories out of there?
Wow. Well, I will say that a lot of my coworkers were people who were once in the program, which was the coolest part about it, and these are people that I still have friendship with. In fact, the president of that organization, Miami Rescue Mission, was once a crackhead who entered into the program. Now he's Mr. President.
That's so cool.
And so you hear a lot about those kind of stories. It's similar to what you guys are doing. I mean, right? A lot of the folks that you hire on staff.
Yeah, I think we probably have probably 15 alumni that are staff now, and I would say 99% of our staff are recovering addicts. Last question is, just like what you say about Eckhart Tolle, like when he talks about, Christianity in his books where he doesn't need to and he could pick anything and he chooses to use this as an example, that it goes further than someone who's Christian talking about Christianity. When you talk about the 12-step program, to me, I'm like, wow, like that's really cool because I really believe it's one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century. I think that the whole organization and the way that it works is unlike any other spiritual, like we meet all over the country. We don't need a fancy building. We pop up a meeting. There's no like leader. The way that the 12-step program works in its organization level is just different than anything else I've ever seen and has survived based on straight donations and book selling. Can you talk a little bit about how like your like what you thought the 12 steps were before and like what you think of it now?
Yeah, well, I also, I'm with you on that assessment. I think that is the 12 steps are like the gift that America has been able to offer to the world in terms of spirituality.
Well, I never thought of it that way. Because it's one of the only things that we actually came up with.
And so what I love about the 12 steps is first and foremost this focus on surrender, because that really is the whole thing. And everything I teach, everything I say is about helping people enter into this state of surrender and moving and flowing with life and understanding what is and what is not under our control and being able to accept what is, all of these things that come with surrender. That's huge. The second part that I love about the 12 steps is this recurring theme of taking responsibility. It's taking responsibility. In one sense, we are a product of our background, our environment, our friendships, our upbringing, and our experiences. And we operate in this unconscious, automatic programming until we wake up because it hurts so much to keep being how we've always been. And then we start taking responsibility, not taking blame, taking responsibility for the way that I see the world and interpret the world. And then to begin to make new conscious choices and create the life that we truly want to live. And to live in tune with who we really are, our most authentic self. That only becomes possible when you're willing to own up to your stuff. And that's what the 12 steps are about.
Like when I got clean, I thought like the 12 steps were people using it as a cop-out and, I'm just an addict, and there's like a pity party. And the more I dove into it, the biggest misconception of the 12 steps is that people have the idea that we are sitting around saying we're powerless. And the first step the most powerful thing in the first step is is that we were powerless. That when you're on the side of the road complaining about your tire, you're powerless. But as soon as someone teaches you how to change a tire, for the rest of your life, if you ever get a flat tire, you now have the power to. But if you know how to change a tire and you refuse to do the work to change it, now you need to take accountability for your laziness, take accountability for being a victim, all sorts of things, because now you know. That's what we call being in recovery. Being in recovery doesn't mean that you're clean. Being in recovery means that you're clean and that you have been given the tools to change the tire if you needed to change the tire. And then we don't want to sit back and not change the tire and then play the victim.
Right, exactly. And so it's moving from that victimhood into co-creator of your life. And again, we don't have to make it so personal. The best way I can encourage people to enter into this process of discovering who they are and transforming their life is to assess your life, become aware of your behaviors and your beliefs and your habits, but don't make this whole process of changing and transforming into a personal thing. Because if you make it personal, you can fall into two traps. The first is the guilt and shame trap from trying really hard but not being able to do it, right? Like, oh, I'm trying to get clean, but I keep relapsing. So I fall back into the guilt and shame. The other side of it is, hey, you may be successful, but then you actually start thinking that it has anything to do with you. And you start taking credit. And now you start looking down at other people.
The ego, the pride.
Yes. You understand? So,
and that I think is interesting with the 12 steps, because whether you've been there 20 years or 20 days or 20 minutes, when you walk in that door, there is no hierarchy. You are just another person.
That's it.
Coming to get a drink of water.
That's it.
Because you were thirsty. And you can't drink enough water yesterday to make up for today.
Right.
You know, it is just like breathing. You can't breathe a whole bunch yesterday. You don't got to breathe today. And a lot of times people look down at people who go to meetings because they're like, oh, you still need to go there?
Right.
But I'm like, let me ask you something. Do you know a Christian who graduates from church?
Right, exactly.
Do you know someone that practices jujitsu and stops practicing? Do you know somebody that has gotten so good that they don't need to try anymore? So just because I still go does not mean that it's a crutch, doesn't mean that I'm weak, doesn't mean that I'm going to go and get high. And I was talking to someone the other day and he was like, look, I go to meetings not because if I don't go, I'm going to go gamble, just the way as someone who goes to church doesn't go to church because if he leaves, he's going to go kill somebody. You know, it is a spiritual fitness. It is something that I need to condition. Because our mind is constantly reverting to what we see on TV, the news or whatever. And I need to train my brain to think positively. I need to train my brain to not be a victim. I need to train my brain to see truth.
And that repetition is what now ingrains you in these new patterns. These
it
new
reinforces
ways
it. But if you stop doing it, then it'll go away just like working out. Well, I love you, bro. You are the man. I appreciate you coming out here. And that was Danny Prada. He has a church called Heartway Church. He also has a podcast. He also has an Instagram, Heartway.
Heartway Church, or at @D_Prada.
D_Prada. Thank you, Mo.
Holler at me.
Bye. This show is not affiliated with any specific 12-step program. If you or a loved one is struggling with an addiction, please find a local 12-step meeting. If you believe you may need detox or drug treatment of any kind, please call 888-699-9395 to speak to a specialist. This show is sponsored by United Recovery Project, a state-of-the-art drug and alcohol rehab facility. You can visit our website at unitedrecoveryproject.com.